Types of ownership, otherwise known as types of tenancy. These are going to come into play when you have multiple owners of the same tracts of land. Doesn't matter how many people there are, that'll be subject to what you're actually running. But if you just have a single owner, they're just the owner, be it the mineral owner or the surface owner or both. They're just an owner. You don't need a type of ownership in that case other than the person's name. If you have two or more people who own something, you're going to have multiple types of tenancies. Tenants in common. Two or more people who own an unrelated interest to the same piece of property. Two or more owners owning equal or unequal shares of the same property. Somebody might own 75%, somebody might own 10%, somebody might own 5%, that leaves 10% to somebody else. Two or more individuals owning equal or unequal shares of the same property. They are not tied together in any way. They each own their interests separately. It can be brother and sister. It can be best friends. Could be anybody. Anybody. Think of it as ownership of a corporation. We all go into business together. And I'm a 90% owner of whatever business we go into. And then all the rest of you share that 10%. Well, we buy a building or rent a space. I don't separate that into this 90% is mine. We all own the same building, just in different percentages. Joint tenancy. Joint tenants are two or more people owning equal or unequal shares tied together by rights of survivorship. A lot of times you'll see that. Joint tenants with rights of survivorship. If it doesn't have the with rights of survivorship, it still has rights of survivorship. Meaning, if one person dies with rights of survivorship, and they're joint tenants, it'll automatically pass to the remaining, to the surviving joint tenant. In the meantime, you can sell it or do whatever you want with it. It's yours. It's untied to the other parties other than survivorship. If you got 10 people who all own 10% of a piece of land as joint tenants, and 9 of them all die without ever doing anything else with it, then there's one person left, they own all of it. But in the meantime, any one of those people can sell off their interest. Parties A, B, and C are joint tenants. They all share rights of survivorship. Party A dies. Parties B and C are still joint tenants. Now they have a half. Party C doesn't die, but gives to Party D their one half. So now Party B has a half, Party D has a half. They're no longer joint tenants. The joint tenancy dissolved because these sold to an outside party who was not specifically mentioned as a joint tenant. Now they could get involved if D were to agree to be a joint tenant with the remaining owner, B, but it's unlikely.
Neither of these can be assumed, right? I mean, they have to be filed in that way initially, correct?
Yes.
On court record.
Yes. If it's not mentioned what type of tenancy it is, it's always tenants in common. Except for one case, which is, it doesn't specify joint tenancy, but it's the two parties. It's listed as and or. This word, or, in Oklahoma, identifies joint tenancy. I didn't know that for a long time. But luckily it wasn't a big deal because it hasn't really sprung up until the last 10 or 12 years. Joint tenants still can sell anything they want. They don't need the approval of any other joint tenants. It's still theirs to do with what they want. However, they're tied together by rights of survivorship. Questions?
So basically, in the previous example, where party C gave half ownership to party D, so that would make them tenants.
Yes. Parties B and party D, at that point, would be tenants in common.
What if party C had only conveyed part of their interest?
Okay, let's do that. We'll do the whole thing again. Matter of fact, we won't. We'll just do this. A and B each have half. As joint tenants. Party B grants to party C 1/4, which leaves them with 1/4. These two are still joint tenants. Them with their half and them with their quarter. Party C is not tied to them in any way, shape, or form. Joint tenancy is not dissolved between the two parties that already had it. But that other quarter interest does not belong to that tenancy.
So if A and B both grow, C just stays with the quarter.
If A and B both grow, whichever one dies first, will get that portion that was owned by them. I'm sorry, it'll go to the survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the other one dies, whoever had it at the end, let's say B dies first. Now all of a sudden A has 3/4. When A dies, it goes to A's heirs. Unless C is specifically mentioned, they are not tied together anymore. There's no rights of survivorship of tenants in common. And unless tenancy is specified, it is tenants in common.
I have a question. How would a bankruptcy affect A and B in a joint tenancy? They would both lose the property, wouldn't they?
Depends on what year it was.
Oh, it's current.
1970, well, anything current, then no. No, it's only going to take,
Probably
What
just
is-
in the last 5 years.
it's only going to take what is owned by whoever is labeled as the defendant.
Even though it's in joint tenancy.
Yeah, because it's separate ownership. What if we're not related? What if it's me and you who own each half interest each, and you default on something? Why would they be?
Oh, okay.
Why would I be held
Yeah.
liable for your debt? There's no ties except for rights of survivorship.
Okay, that makes sense. All right.
You're dealing in mineral interest. What if C wanted to give half of his interest to D in a joint tenancy situation?
Or C wanted to give half of, and you said his interest, right?
Right. So he'd have an eighth and an eighth,
But they would be joint
but they could be joint tenants.
It's not being granted to them as joint tenants, though.
What if they
They
could
get their own.
What if C gives to, in this case, they wouldn't grant it like this. If they're just giving an eighth, then it's just going to be tenants in common. Now, if he said, granting my quarter interest to C and D as joint tenants,
That makes sense.
then they'd each have an eighth.
In the and or only applies to tenants, requires subscribership. The and or.
The word or, it only is implied joint tenancy.
Does it work with tenancy in common at all?
Tenants in common is, like I said, tenants in common have no ties to each other whatsoever.
And then C, you're saying on tenancy, first example, you have to actually refile it and create it.
If tenancy is not specified, it will always be tenants in common. So like your example was I was gonna grant an eighth to D. Well, all you did was grant an eighth. You didn't specify the type of tenancy.
But you could,
You could, but you can
and
only
people have.
if you
correct?
if you wanted to say, I'm granting an eighth, which leaves us an eighth, well, then they each own a 16th. And C owns an eighth as a tenant in common or as the owner of that 1/8, and also owns a 1/16th interest or another 1/8 as a joint tenant with D.
These are all things that we would track down.
Oh yeah. And you'll run into that stuff all the time. All the time. You'll get used to it pretty quick. Your handwriting probably won't be as good as mine. Here's a fun one. Tenants by the entirety. Joint tenancy that can only be between husband and wife. That's it. Exactly the same as joint tenancy, but it can only be between husband and wife. I've seen it one time in all the instruments of conveyance I've ever seen. Have you ever seen it?
No.
You? Anyone else? I've seen it once. It was when I was with Pencil, and it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless because there's no reason why you couldn't just say joint tenants. There is nothing special that it does specifically other than restrict who else it can be by. But all you have to do is write joint tenants. It's not like anybody else can just add their name to that thing willy-nilly anyway.
In Illinois, you see all that.
Do you see it a lot in Illinois? Well, is it still the same in Illinois? Is it just a joint tenancy, but only between husband and wife? Yeah. Flip to page 23. Life tenancy. Somebody who is a life tenant is no longer a mineral owner. All they are is a beneficiary of whatever's being owned. Party A grants to Party B everything they own, reserving a life estate.
So they're not owners, they're just beneficiaries.
Correct.
So again, they're no longer what?
What, yeah, we didn't hear what you said.
They're no longer the owner, they're just the beneficiary of that. The person that will receive, person or people, ownership is a remainderman. Think of the life tenant as a custodian of, but without all the rights. They share all of the rights. They may or may not reserve 100% of all the benefits of said real property. But, spell that right? They will likely receive at least a portion of it for the duration of their life. Upon their death, all rights will transfer to the remainder.
Does he get ownership or just beneficiary?
The remainderman already has ownership. They already own it.
Okay.
However, they don't receive the benefits of it, or at least not all of the benefits of it, depending on how it's written out in its contract. Once again, you can write anything you want. They can retain, say, half the rights, half the royalties or benefits of, and all of the executive rights, meaning they retain all of the control. However, in this case, if they retain all of the control, then as far as 2008 in Oklahoma is concerned, it's no longer a life estate. It's no longer a life tenancy. It becomes a transfer on death deed. We'll cover that next.
So, where do you see this? Like, is this same like a power of attorney, like given whenever it's similar to that, where one person has control over the
You see this all the time. What this typically is to do is to bypass the probate process.
Oh.
It's in lieu of a will. Kind of like a joint tenancy would do. Upon my death, everything transfers. A life tenant that has not reserved all executive rights, a standard life tenancy, cannot do anything without the approval of the remainderment. The remainderment has to sign off on it. Say, yep, I approve. Because the remainderment is the current owner and the future beneficiary of said owned property. I see blank looks. I might be given one. Life tenant cannot do anything without the approval of the remainder. They don't own it anymore. All they are is the beneficiary. They own it, but they're the future beneficiary of it. Remaindermen can do whatever they want with their ownership. They can sell it to anybody they want, any way they want. However, anybody they sell it to is going to be subject to the life estate of the life tenant. Now, there are different ways that you can have a life estate. You can have, reserving all right, title, and interest. You can reserve portions of. The most important thing to remember is who has the executive rights. Executive, like the president. Who's in charge? Who gets to make the decisions? Without any specification, the executive rights are going to be shared. At least for the life tenant's portion. Life tenant can't do anything without approval of the remainder. The future interest, the ownership of the remainderment, doesn't matter. Life tenant is out of the picture in that department. Executive rights, things like signing oil and gas leases, selling the property. In a standard life tenancy, life tenant doesn't have any executive rights. Executive rights are going to the remainder. It used to be the case for all types of life estates in Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma decided to start following suit with, like Kansas, and a few other places. We have I don't list this with deeds because it's more closely related to life tenancy than it is to deeds. Transfer on death deeds. These are new to Oklahoma as of 2008. What they do is they grant everything just like a life estate. However, the grantor reserves all executive rights, and it is completely revocable. While the grantor is still alive, they can change their mind and sell it, do anything they want. A life tenancy, in a life estate, the life tenant can't make any of those decisions without the approval of the remainder, because the executive rights are going to be shared. Transfer on death deeds, however, all of the executive rights remain with the grantor. And upon death, it goes automatically to the grantee.
So the executive rights always shared?
Sorry?
Are the executive rights always shared between the life tenant and the remainder?
That's why there's a difference. That's why they decided to start using the transfer on death deed. Before, you had a a life tenancy that was created, a life estate was reserved, and the life tenant retained all executive rights. Well, then it's no longer a life estate. If there's nothing to ever transfer power-wise, because the executive rights are retained by the life tenant, well, it's not really a life estate, because the remainderman has no authority. It's just a will, in other words. It's just saying, well, when I'm dead, you get it. But in the meantime, I can do with it whatever I want. Which is exactly why the transfer and death deed came out, to separate the two. If you see a life estate where the life tenant is reserving all the executive rights prior to 2008, then all it is a transfer on death deed bill. After 2008, they started separating. Here's what sucks about transfer on death deeds. They were new, 2008. As of November of last year, 2011, they've rewritten some of the things that are kind of important to us. Now, the grantor, which had all the executive rights, upon their death, it no longer automatically transfers to the grantee. Used to be automatic. Now the grantee has to file an affidavit within 9 months of the death of the grantor to accept the minerals. Remember what I said, how there's only one time you have to worry about somebody who's receiving something that has to sign something? This is it. Go figure. It's an affidavit that does it. File an affidavit accepting the minerals from the decedent, the grantor. Otherwise, 9 months goes by, the minerals will revert back to the estate of the decedent and sit there until it's probated. That was handled. They had paragraphs and clauses and all kinds of stuff that took care of that prior to 5 months ago. And 5 months ago, they scratched out all those subparagraphs and clauses and things that handled that. So now, 9 months is a very arbitrary number.
Why did that happen? Why did they choose?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure there's a reason.
I'm sure there is.
It's
Some lawyer got fancy.
exactly.
I can only think of one thing in the world that equates to 9 months. Well, and maybe it has something to do with a pregnancy. Maybe it has something to do with say, the rights of ownership for future generations or possible heirs to come. I can't think of any other reason why a 9-month number would be chosen. It's arbitrary as far as I can see. We see a lot of things that are 30 days or 60 days or 120 days, a year. This is the first thing I've ever seen in this business that was 9 months. You guys seen anything else that's 9 months? Is this new to you? Yeah. I just got an email, an update about it. I think I might have sent it to you. I sent it to both of you, actually.
I don't know if they did Kansas, but not Oklahoma.
Kansas has been familiar with transfer on death deeds for a long time, and we basically we followed suit. We just copied their laws, and everything was going swimmingly. And all of a sudden, they decide to just change things up a little bit, and now they've screwed us until they fix it.
Does this apply specifically to minerals, or would this apply to real property?
Real property, anything. So what's the difference between transfer on death deed and a life estate? Executive rights. The only reason that a life tenancy prior to 2008 is called a life tenancy or a life estate is because we didn't have, even with executive rights reserved by the grantor, we didn't have transfer on death deeds. That's why we didn't start seeing those things until we were working in Cordell. Questions?
So you still have to have the beneficiaries of a transfer on death deed ratify any kind of instrument?
No. Ratification, and a ratification is nothing more than an approval of something that the manager or the custodian or the beneficiary of a life estate or a transferee is agreeing to, saying yes. You can have them, let's say if I'm a life tenant or whatever, I sign an oil and gas lease. Well, the future interest owner, the remainderman, is going to have to sign either an identical oil and gas lease that approves it, their future interest, or ratification saying, yes, I approve this. Because it's their interest. It's their future interest. But that only applies to executive rights. Transfer on death deed or a life estate with all executive rights reserved needs no confirmation from remainderman of any kind or the transferee of the transfer on death deed. You still see it occasionally. They'll still go ahead and sign the ratification just to make sure everything's in the clear. You know, who knows if the law was changed in November of last year? They want to make sure everything is kind of on the up and up. Answer your question? Executive rights.
Do all lieutenants have transfer on death deeds? Do all lieutenants have the transfer on death deed?
What do you mean?
Well, when they set that up to make sure that you know, transfer on innocent employees that might be
A transfer on death deed is completely separate from.
so is that. I thought you could have done.
Well, you can, but the difference is that a transfer on death deed retains all executive rights. A life tenancy does not automatically retain executive rights. However, if it does retain executive rights, then it is nothing more than a transfer on death deed. But you're still going to write it up as a life tenancy, especially prior to 2008. You'll know what it is. The important part to remember is when you write it down, Party A grants to Party B whatever it is, reserving a life estate. If it says reserving all executive rights, make note of that when you're changing out your title. Stuff that you're going to need to know. I mean, if it's 1820 and you got a life estate, there's a good chance that Party A is dead by now. But you're still kind of wanting to go through and see the proof of that before you just automatically give everything to B. Assumptions are bad. They make an ass out of you. Questions? No questions? Lunch is a killer, isn't it? Did we sit Dave for 5-hour interviews or what? What's the difference between mineral rights, mineral interest, and royalty interest? Anyone? Shout it out there, please. You guys gotta wake up.
So it's not likely.
What is a mineral interest? Think of it in terms as a fractional interest. Royalty? Think of it as money. Royalty interest does not exist until money is made. A royalty interest does not exist until there's profit realized. A royalty is just what it is. Royalties. You hear it all the time. I don't get to see much of it. I do hear it a lot. Mineral interest, think of it as tangible. It's a fractional interest of something real. In this case, minerals, property, surface, real estate. This isn't real until it's in your pocket. It's not even real when it's in the bank. Not real until it's in your pocket. Sound good? Royalty is money. That's kind of in a nutshell. There's many different types of royalty interests. But all of them have one thing in common. They're related to money.